Clara Whitfield pressed her last hairpin into her braid, with hands that had stopped shaking 2 hours ago. Shaking meant she still cared. She didn't care anymore. She lifted her worn leather suitcase from the floor, the same one she'd carried out of her parents' house the year they buried her mother, the year everything started falling apart, and she set it by the door without a sound. Outside, Red Willow was still dark. She had planned it that way. She was not leaving. She was disappearing. There is a difference. Leaving means people notice. Before she could reach the handle, a knock came quiet, certain like the person on the other side had rehearsed the moment. Then a voice, deep, unhurried, and carrying the kind of weight that only came from a man who had already lost something he could not get back. "Miss Whitfield, don't open that door to leave. Open it because I've got something to say that I should have said 2 weeks ago. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about what a woman like Clara deserved." The suitcase had been packed for 3 days before Clara finally decided to carry it downstairs. That was the part nobody understood about a woman who had been broken slowly, not all at once, not in a single violent moment, but in the quiet accumulation of 100 small cruelties. A door that didn't open when she knocked. A chair pulled away before she could sit. A conversation that stopped the moment she walked into the room. You didn't just decide to leave after that kind of damage. You rehearsed it. You packed and unpacked the same suitcase 4 times. You stood at the window watching the street below and told yourself one more day, one more chance, one more morning to see if this town remembered how to be decent. And then one morning, you stopped telling yourself that story, and you just folded your second dress into the case and buckled it shut, and the quiet that followed felt less like defeat and more like relief. Clara Whitfield had lived in Red Willow, Wyoming for 14 months. She had arrived in the spring of 1884 with $32 a strong back and a belief that hard work announced itself louder than gossip. She was 25 years old, plain-spoken, full-figured, and she had learned early that the world looked at a woman like her and decided before she ever opened her mouth what kind of person she must be. Too much, too soft, too slow. Words that people never actually said to her face, but that she could read in the way they looked past her shoulder when she spoke and the way a shopkeeper's smile thinned the moment she stepped through his door. But she had survived worse towns than Red Willow. She had cooked in a roadhouse kitchen in Nebraska where the owner docked her pay every time a traveler left a complaint, regardless of whose fault it was. She had sewn in a Denver boarding house where the landlady inspected every hem with a magnifying glass and a ready insult. She had learned to fold herself smaller, speak quieter, ask for less. She had learned that a woman in her position, no family, no money, no husband to stand beside her, had to make herself indispensable to be tolerated. And even then, the tolerance had an expiration date. Red Willow had felt different at first. May Holbrook, who ran the bakery 2 doors down from the general store, had hired Clara in her 3rd week to help with morning pastry work. May was 71 years old, bad-tempered about shortcuts, and possessed of an absolute certainty that cinnamon was a gift from God that most people were using incorrectly. She had watched Clara roll dough for 40 minutes before she said anything. "You're not flinching," May said. Clara looked up. "Ma'am, most girls flinch when I walk behind them, like they're expecting a slap. You're not flinching." "Should I be?" May made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Not from me. I save my slapping for people who put too much salt in the butter." She set a mug of coffee next to Clara's elbow. "You can come back tomorrow." That was as close to a job offer as May had ever made, and Clara understood it as such. She came back the next morning, and every morning after that for 6 weeks, and in that time she learned that May Holbrook knew everyone in Red Willow and had an opinion about all of them that she delivered with the same unflinching calm she applied to pie crust. May was the first person in that town who had looked at Clara and seen a person rather than a problem to manage. Clara had also found sewing work with 2 families on the east side of town, and had begun quietly taking in mending for anyone who brought it to her torn children's coats, work shirts with blown-out elbows, Sunday dresses that needed letting out or taking in. She charged a fair price, and sometimes charged nothing at all, when the person doing the asking clearly couldn't afford fare. She had told herself she was building something. A small life, maybe not the life she had once imagined, but a life with purpose and steadiness, and the particular dignity that came from honest work. Then Nathan Caldwell noticed her. Nathan was 28 years old, and the only son of Gerald Caldwell, who owned the largest dry goods operation in 3 counties, and who had used that ownership to secure himself a particular kind of social power that he mistook for character. Nathan had his father's square jaw and his father's habit of standing too close when he spoke to women. He had come into May's bakery on a Thursday afternoon in October, 6 months after Clara had arrived, and he had watched her lift a tray of biscuits from the oven with an expression that Clara recognized immediately because she had learned to recognize it the hard way. "You work here?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Gerald Caldwell's my father. We're the biggest buyers May's got." Clara set the tray down. "I'm sure May appreciates your family's business. I could put in a good word for you. Make sure May keeps you on through winter." "That's kind," Clara said, "but May makes her own decisions about who she keeps on." He had leaned against the counter then, with the ease of a man who had never been told no by anyone whose opinion he valued. "I'm just saying, there are ways I could be helpful to you, and there are ways you could be helpful to me." Clara turned and looked at him directly. She had learned that some men interpreted quiet avoidance as uncertainty, and uncertainty as an opening. Looking directly was not an invitation. It was a closing of a door. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "I'm going to need you to take your elbows off May's counter." He stared at her. Then he laughed short and cold, and he pushed off the counter and walked out. She thought that was the end of it. She was wrong about that in the particular way that women who refuse powerful men are often wrong, not in their judgment of the man, but in their estimate of how far a bruised ego will carry itself. Within 2 weeks the stories began. She was difficult. She was dishonest. She had cheated a customer out of payment for sewing work that she had never actually completed. She had a bad temper, a disreputable past, a string of troubles in every town before this one. The stories were specific enough to sound credible and vague enough to be impossible to disprove. Clara heard them second-hand, then first-hand, when a woman who had been bringing her mending for months appeared at her door to collect her things without a word of explanation. Then another. Then the family on the east side who had hired her for sewing sent a note through their hired hand rather than coming themselves. May Holbrook said nothing about any of it for 8 days. Then she sat down across from Clara at the work table one morning and set her hands flat on the flour-dusted surface. "Nathan Caldwell came in yesterday," May said. "I figured he might. He told me things. I imagine he did." May looked at her for a long moment. "I told him to get out of my bakery and not come back until he learned to keep his mouth off other people's reputations." Clara felt something loosen in her chest that had been pulled tight for weeks. "Thank you, May." "Don't thank me. I'm not doing you a favor. I'm doing what's true." May picked up her rolling pin and went back to work. "But Clara, I've been in this town for 43 years. The Caldwells have more reach than I do. You need to know that." Clara knew it. She had known it with the sick certainty of experience, the way you know a storm is coming. Not because you can see it yet, but because the air changes quality and the birds go quiet. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Pruitt, had come to her room the following Friday evening, and she had stood in the doorway with an expression of profound discomfort that Clara knew was not guilt, but inconvenience. "I'm sure you understand," Mrs. Pruitt said. "I don't," Clara said, "but I'll be out by Sunday. There's no reason to be short about it." "I'm not being short, Mrs. Pruitt. I'm being accurate." She had found a single room above the general store, smaller, colder, with a window that didn't fully close, and a floorboard that announced every step. She had paid the first month in what remained of her savings, and she had told herself she would rebuild. She had rebuilt before. But the work had dried up faster than she expected, and the winter was coming on hard, and the whispers in the street had taken on the particular momentum of small-town certainty. The point at which people stopped questioning what they'd heard, because believing it had become more comfortable than doubting it. She stopped being greeted at the general store. She stopped being acknowledged at the water pump. She sat in the back pew at church because the women near the front had developed a habit of filling the space beside them with their coat and their bag and their hat whenever Clara walked in. She ate alone. She sewed by lamplight after dark because the daylight hours were for trying, and she was running out of things to try. She had written one letter to May Holbrook in the third week after moving out of the boarding house. May had written back within 2 days in her cramped economical hand, and the letter had said, "I know what you are. Don't let them tell you otherwise. But I am an old woman, and there are limits to what I can do. I am sorry for that." Clara had read that letter 4 times, and then folded it into her coat pocket and kept it there. On the nights when the cold came through the window, she couldn't close. She would press her hand against her pocket and feel the shape of it. She had counted her remaining money on a Tuesday night in November, 3 weeks before she packed the suitcase, and the number she arrived at had a clarity to it that was almost peaceful. She had enough for the stagecoach fare west with a little left over. She did not know where west would take her. She knew a woman could start over more easily in a place where nobody had already decided what kind of woman she was. She had done it before. She would do it again. She packed her sewing needles first. Then her thread sorted by color into the small tin box that had belonged to her mother. Then her 2 dresses, her shawl, her Sunday shoes, wrapped in a cloth. She packed the letter from May Holbrook last, tucking it between the dresses where it wouldn't crease. She had intended to be gone before the town woke up. That was the logic of disappearing rather than leaving you. Did it in the dark, in the hours when nobody was watching, so that the next day they would simply find an absence where you had been and would adjust to it with the ease that comes from never having fully acknowledged your presence. She had not slept. She had sat on the edge of the bed in her coat and her traveling boots and waited for the quality of dark outside the window to shift toward gray. When it did, she stood. She lifted the suitcase. It was not heavy. That was the honest measure of 14 months. Everything she owned fit in one bag that a woman of her size and strength lifted without effort. She carried it to the door. She reached for the handle. And the knock came, not loud, not urgent. The knock of a man who had decided something and was not in a hurry about the consequences of that decision. 3 knocks evenly spaced, the kind that assumed the door would be answered. Clara stood with her hand still on the handle and did not move. Her first thought was Mrs. Pruitt, though that made no sense at this hour. Her second thought was that she had not paid the last week's rent because she had forgotten, and then she remembered that she had. She was certain. Her third thought was Nathan Caldwell, and something cold moved through her. "Miss Whitfield." The voice was not Nathan Caldwell's voice. It was lower, and it had none of Caldwell's performance in it. None of that particular quality of a man who was aware of being heard. This voice was directed entirely at the door in front of it, as if the door were the only audience that mattered. "I know it's early. I apologize for that." Clara did not open the door. "Who's there?" "Ethan Walker. I have a ranch 4 miles out on the Sweetgrass Road. We haven't met." "Then why are you at my door?" "Because May Holbrook told me where to find you. And she said if I waited until a decent hour, you'd be gone." A pause. She was right, wasn't she? It wasn't a question. Clara looked down at the suitcase in her hand. "What do you want, Mr. Walker?" "To talk, that's all. 5 minutes." Another pause, and then something in the voice shifted, not softer exactly, but more direct. "Miss Whitfield, I know what this town has done to you. And I know you've got every reason in the world to walk out that door and never look back. I'm not going to argue with your reasons. I just need 5 minutes before you decide." Clara set the suitcase down. She did not know why. Later she would tell herself it was curiosity, but the truth was simpler and harder to admit. It was the quality of honesty in the voice. She had spent months surrounded by voices that were performing something. Performing courtesy, or performing contempt, or performing the particular studied indifference of people who had decided she did not merit their full attention. This voice was not performing anything. It was just talking to a closed door, with the patience of a man who understood that the door had good reason to stay closed. She opened it. Ethan Walker was tall, not exceptionally so, but tall in the way of a man who had worked outside his whole life with the kind of build that came from actual labor rather than performance of it. He was 36 years old, and looked it honestly, with weather lines at the corners of his eyes and at the edges of his mouth and dark brown hair that needed cutting under the brim of a hat he held in both hands. He was wearing a good coat, not new, but well kept, and he was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately name, because it was not pity and it was not appraisal. It took her a moment to identify it. He was looking at her the way May Holbrook had looked at her that first morning in the bakery, with a kind of steady, uncomplicated attention that assumed she had something worth looking at. "You were leaving," he said. It was not an accusation. "I was." "I'm glad you opened the door." "You have 5 minutes, Mr. Walker." He nodded as if that was entirely reasonable. "May Holbrook told me about you. Not the stories going around town, I've heard those. I mean, she told me about you. She told me you sewed winter coats for 3 children whose father couldn't afford the fabric. She told me you sat with the Henderson woman for 2 nights when her husband was sick and nobody else would come near the house for fear of contagion. She told me you worked in her bakery for 6 weeks, and in that time she never once caught you cutting a corner." He paused. "She said if I was looking for a person with genuine character, she knew exactly one in Red Willow, and I should find her before someone's cruelty drove her out of town permanently." Clara felt the muscles in her jaw tighten. She had spent so long bracing against words that were designed to diminish her. That words which weren't had a particular physical effect, like pressure releasing from something that had been compressed too long. She did not want to cry in front of this man. She was not going to. "May's generous," Clara said. "May's accurate," Ethan said. "There's a difference. She's the most accurate person I know, which is why I drove into town at 4 in the morning on her word." "What do you actually want?" He put his hat back on, not in dismissal, but in the way of a man settling in to say something he had thought about. "I have a ranch, cattle operation about 400 head, 2 hired hands. I've been running it alone since my wife passed 3 years ago. I have 2 children. Lily, she's 8, and Samuel, he's 5. I can manage the cattle and the land and the repairs. I cannot manage the cattle and the land and the repairs and raise 2 children who deserve better than what I'm giving them. I need help, not charity help. Work. Real work, fair pay, and a place to stay that isn't above a building where the window doesn't close." Clara looked at him. "You know about the window." "May knows about the window. May knows most things." "I'm not a housekeeper, Mr. Walker. I'm not looking for a housekeeper. I'm looking for someone who can help make that house into something those children can grow up in. Cooking, yes. Mending, yes. But also someone who'll be present with them. Who'll sit at the table and answer questions, and tell them stories, and let them know that the world is not as cold as it's been feeling since their mother died." He looked at her steadily. "May told me you're that kind of person. I believe May. You don't know me." "No, that's true. And you don't know me, which is why I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight. I'm asking you to come out to the ranch and see it. 2 weeks. If you want to leave after 2 weeks, I'll bring you back to town myself, and I'll put you on any stagecoach you name." Clara looked past him for a moment into the dark hallway of the building she was about to leave forever. She thought about the stagecoach. She thought about somewhere west, some new town, some new beginning that was indistinguishable from every other beginning she had made, that carried in its luggage all the same old difficulties, wearing slightly different clothes. "Your children," she said. "Do they want someone in the house?" Howe was quiet for a moment, and she appreciated that he didn't answer immediately. "Lily doesn't want anyone in the house," he said. "She's 8 and she's lost her mother, and she's been holding herself together by being suspicious of everything that might take something else away from her. Samuel doesn't talk much. He barely talked before his mother died, and he's talked less since." He paused. "Neither of them need someone to fix them. They need someone to just be there and let them decide on their own time what they're willing to trust." Clara picked up her suitcase. Ethan did not reach for it, did not offer to carry it with the casual assumption of a man who expected the gesture to be welcomed. He simply waited. "I'm not agreeing to anything," she said. "I understand. 2 weeks. After that I make my own decision." "Yes, ma'am." "And if those children are cruel to me?" "Then I'll address it, directly." Clara looked at him one more moment. Then she walked through the doorway and pulled the door shut behind her. She had packed her bags to disappear. She had no way of knowing yet that she was instead walking toward the only home she would ever stop trying to leave. The wagon was at the bottom of the stairs, a solid work wagon with 2 horses that stood patient in the cold pre-dawn air. Ethan Walker took the steps in 2 strides and had the horses checked and ready before Clara reached the street. He offered his hand to help her onto the wagon seat. She took it briefly and then settled herself without ceremony. They drove in silence for the first mile. The town of Red Willow fell away behind them, the dark shapes of buildings, the unlit windows, the street where she had been quietly erased from the social map of every person she had thought of as a neighbor. She did not look back at it. "May said you're from Missouri originally," Ethan said. "I grew up near Jefferson City. My parents had a small farm. They passed when I was 19, both of them 2 years apart, my mother first. I'm sorry." She believed him. There was no performance in it. "It was a while ago," she said, which was the answer she gave when she had learned that saying. "It still matters. It still sits on my chest." Sometimes in the night was too much truth for the early stage of a conversation with a stranger. "I lost my wife 3 years ago," Ethan said. "Her name was Ruth. Fever. It came on fast and it was over in 12 days. He said it the way you said things that you had made peace with in some fundamental way, but that still had weight. Lily was 5. Samuel was 2. Samuel doesn't really remember her. Lily remembers everything." "That must be hard for Lily, to be the one who remembers." "I think it is," he said. "She carries it like a job, like it's her responsibility to keep the memory right." He was quiet for a moment. "You were the one who sat with the Henderson woman," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, Jim Henderson told me that, last spring. He said a woman from town sat with his wife for 2 nights while she was at her worst, and he said he never even got the woman's full name. He said she wouldn't take any money for it." Ethan looked at her briefly. "That was you." "Mrs. Henderson was frightened," Clara said. "People who are that sick don't need to be left alone with it." "No," he agreed. "They don't." He looked back at the road. "That was 8 months ago, and Jim Henderson still talks about it. He told that story the first time I met him, and he's told it twice since. And this whole time the woman in the story was 15 minutes from where I was sitting." Clara did not say anything to that. The road curved west, and the sky ahead had begun to lighten at its edge. Not sunrise yet, but the first suggestion of it, the dark becoming less absolute, the landscape gaining edges. "Your hired hands," she said. "What are they like?" "Tom Bridger has worked for me 7 years. He's 44, quiet, honest. He'll be respectful to you, or he'll find himself looking for different employment." Ethan said it without heat, just as a statement of fact. "The other is a young man named Carver. He's been with me 2 seasons. He's young, and he works hard, and he is completely incapable of being indirect about anything, which is sometimes exhausting and mostly useful." Despite herself, Clara almost smiled. "And the children. What do they eat?" "Anything that isn't burnt. Samuel has a strong feeling against beans that I've never fully understood. Lily will eat anything you put in front of her, and will have an opinion about it while she eats it." "She sounds like May." "God help us all if that's true," Ethan said, and there was something in his voice that was almost humor, the careful, slightly rusty quality of a man who had not practiced it in a while. They drove another mile. The horse's breath made small clouds in the cold air. Clara sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the road ahead and thought about 2 children she had not met, and a house she had not seen, and a man sitting 3 feet to her left whom she had known for less than an hour. She thought about May Holbrook, 71 years old, awake at 4 in the morning to write a letter to a rancher she trusted, sending him to a closed door with precise instructions about timing. She thought about the letter in her suitcase folded between her dresses. "I know what you are. Don't let them tell you otherwise." She had been told a great many things in her life by people who did not know her. She had been called a burden by the cousin who had taken her in for 6 months after her father died. She had been called a mistake by the roadhouse owner in Nebraska when she left his employment without giving 2 weeks' notice, which she had not given because she had needed to leave before the situation became dangerous. She had been called difficult and uncooperative and too sensitive and lacking in social graces, and unwilling to accept her place, which she had come to understand, was a phrase that people used when what they meant was that she had declined to make herself invisible on their schedule. She had almost let them be right. That was the thing she would not say aloud to anyone for a very long time. She had almost let the weight of those words compact themselves into belief. The suitcase on the wagon bed behind her, packed in the dark, carried downstairs that creaked in a building she had never felt welcome in that suitcase, was the evidence of how close she had come. Another hour, and she would have been at the stage depot. Another day, and Red Willow would have been just another name on the list of places she had been and left. "Mr. Walker," she said. "Ethan," he said. She considered that. "Ethan, when May told you about me, what exactly did she say?" He was quiet for a moment. "She said you were the kind of woman who saw what needed doing and did it without waiting to be asked. She said you were proud in the way that was actually backbone, not vanity. And she said—" He paused. "She said that Red Willow didn't deserve you, and that if somebody didn't do something, the town was about to lose the best person in it." Clara looked at the road ahead for a long moment. "May is prone to exaggeration," she said finally. "She really isn't," Ethan said. "No," Clara admitted quietly. "She really isn't." The first edge of actual sunrise was beginning to appear on the horizon when the ranch came into view, a house, a barn fencing that extended in both directions, the shapes of cattle in a field beyond. Clara looked at it. It was not beautiful in any decorated way. It was the beauty of something that had been built by hand and used daily and maintained carefully, a beauty that came from function and from care, not from ornament. Ethan stopped the wagon at the house gate and set the brake. He climbed down, and this time when he turned and offered his hand, Clara took it without hesitation. She stood on the ground of Ethan Walker's ranch and looked at the house. Somewhere inside it, 2 children were sleeping, a girl who remembered everything, and a boy who had learned to be quiet. Somewhere inside, it was a kitchen that would need fire started, and a table that would need someone to sit at it, and 2 small lives that were making their way forward in the particular determined way of children who had already learned that the world was not entirely safe, and had decided to keep going anyway. Clara picked up her suitcase from the wagon bed. She walked to the front door of the house. She did not know, standing there in the new light of a Wyoming morning, with her worn suitcase in her hand, that she was going to spend the rest of her life there. She did not know that the front door she was about to walk through would become the door she would think of in her oldest years when she thought of the word home. She did not know that the 2 children sleeping inside would become the architecture of her heart. She knew only that the Stagecoach West was no longer the next thing she was doing. And for now, in that particular morning, in the thin, cold air of a Wyoming November, that was enough. Part 2. The front door opened with a sound that Clara would come to know, the way you come to know a person's voice, distinct, particular belonging, entirely to itself. A slight resistance at the top of the frame, then a give, then the quiet complaint of old hinges that had been swung 10,000 times in all kinds of weather. Ethan pushed it open and stepped back to let her enter first. The smell of the house reached her before anything else. Wood smoke and wool, and something underneath that she identified after a moment as coffee grounds, old and recent. At once the accumulated trace of a kitchen that had been used seriously for years. It was not an unpleasant smell. It was the smell of a place that had been lived in, that had known ordinary mornings and cold winters, and the particular smell of food made by someone who was feeding people they were responsible for. She stepped inside. Ethan moved past her toward the wood stove and crouched to build the fire without ceremony, as if her presence in his house required no particular acknowledgement beyond the practical. She appreciated that. She set her suitcase near the door and stood for a moment with her coat still on, and her hands still cold from the drive, and she listened to the house. It was not silent. Houses that have children in them are never fully silent, even when the children are sleeping. There is a particular quality of occupied quiet, a weight of presence in the air, a sense of held breath. Clara had lived in too many empty places. She knew the difference. "Coffee will take a few minutes," Ethan said. "I can start it," Clara said. He looked at her over his shoulder. "You just arrived." "I know where I am," she said. I don't know where anything else is. Show me the kitchen. He showed her. It was a kitchen that had been managed rather than tended functional orderly in the way that a working man's kitchen is orderly, which is to say, everything had a place and was in its place, but the place had been chosen for convenience rather than care. The coffee tin was next to the stove because that's where you needed it. The flour was on the low shelf because that's where it fit. The dish towel was hung from the oven handle because that was the closest place to hang it. Clara measured coffee and set the pot on and began to look through what he had. Ethan watched her for a moment from the doorway. You don't have to. I know I don't, she said. I want to. She turned and looked at him. When do the children wake up? Lily, usually by 6. Samuel sleeps later unless Lily wakes him. She sometimes does. Does she do it to be kind or to have company? Ethan considered this. Both. Mostly company. She's lonely, Clara said. Not a question. Yes, and she'd rather be angry about that than sad about it. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Yes, that's accurate. I understand that kind of lonely, Clara said, and turned back to the stove. She heard him exhale short and quiet, and she didn't turn around to see his expression. Whatever it was his to hold on to until he was ready to let it go. She had learned that about men who had been carrying things alone for a long time. You didn't reach for what they were carrying. You gave them enough room to set it down on their own. The coffee was ready before the children woke. Ethan poured 2 cups and set one near Clara without asking how she took it, then added the sugar and the small amount of cream when she reached for them, as if he'd filed the information and was done with it. They stood in the kitchen in the early morning with the fire going and the cold outside the windows and the coffee between them, and neither of them spoke for a full 2 minutes, and it was not uncomfortable. It was the most comfortable Clara had been in 14 months. Then a door opened somewhere in the back of the house and small feet crossed a wooden floor with the determined purpose of someone who was awake and had opinions about it. Lily Walker appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was 8 years old, and she had her father's dark hair and the specific expression of a child who has decided that the best defense is to know everything in the room before the room knows her. She stopped when she saw Clara. Her eyes moved from Clara to her father and back to Clara, fast and precise cataloging. Who is she? Lily said. This is Miss Whitfield, Ethan said. She's going to be staying with us for a little while. Why? To help out around the house. Help with cooking, mending. Spend time with you and Samuel. We don't need help. Lily. We've been fine. She looked at Clara directly. We've been fine. Clara looked back at her. She didn't soften the look or make it excessively warm because children who were protecting themselves could smell performance the way dogs smelled fear, and they trusted it about as much. Good morning, Clara said. Lily stared at her. You're big. Lily. Ethan's voice was low. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it. Lily kept looking at Clara with that same unsparing directness. Are you going to be here when we come back from school? That's the plan, Clara said. Are you going to change things? Some things might change, Clara said. I can't promise you they won't, but nothing changes without a reason. Lily processed this with the careful thoroughness of a child who did not yet know that most adults would have told her. Of course, nothing would change, and then changed everything immediately. The honesty seemed to land differently. She didn't smile. But the set of her shoulders shifted barely perceptible in the direction of something other than combat. The bread my father makes is terrible, Lily said. Lily, Ethan said. It's true, Papa. She should know what she's walking into. Lily looked back at Clara. It's flat, like he forgot to let it rise but went ahead anyway. Clara pressed her lips together to keep the smile in. I'll keep that in mind. All right, Lily said. She pulled out a chair and sat down at the table with the proprietary ease of someone in their own territory, making clear that the territory was hers, whether or not she was willing to share it. I take my oatmeal with honey, not too much. Lily, Ethan started. It's fine, Clara said quietly. And it was. She had known from the moment this girl appeared in the doorway that the way through was not around her guardedness, but through it, straight through the same way you moved through a narrow gate carefully, without trying to make yourself smaller than you were, and without making the gate feel like an obstacle. She made the oatmeal. She made it right, and she put the honey where Lily could add her own, because something told her Lily needed to be the one who chose the amount. When the bowl was set in front of her, Lily picked up her spoon and said nothing, which Clara had already learned was as close as this child was going to come to thank you before breakfast. Samuel appeared 40 minutes later, guided by the smell of food, the way children are, small and quiet with sleep still in his eyes and his dark hair pushed sideways. He stopped 2 feet into the kitchen when he saw Clara. He looked at her with an expression that was not suspicious in the way Lily's had been. It was more careful than that, more considered. Clara crouched down, so she was closer to his eye level. Not all the way to the floor, she was a practical woman, and she needed her knees to carry her through the day, but enough. "I'm Clara," she said. Samuel looked at her for a moment. Then he looked past her to the stove, where the second portion of oatmeal was keeping warm. "That for me," he said. "If you want it." He nodded once seriously, as if this were a business agreement. Then he climbed into the chair next to his sister and picked up his spoon and began to eat without further ceremony. Lily watched this exchange with an expression that was trying hard to be neutral and not entirely succeeding. Ethan, leaning against the far wall with his coffee cup, caught Clara's eye for just a moment. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The first morning passed, the way first mornings do on a ranch, with the speed and ordinariness of work that needed doing, regardless of what else was happening. Ethan went out after breakfast to begin the day with Tom Bridger and the young man Carver. The children went to school in the wagon that Tom drove part way before turning back toward the cattle. Clara was left alone in the house. She stood in the kitchen for a moment after the sound of the wagon faded. Then she rolled up her sleeves and started to work. Not because she had been told to, not because she was trying to prove anything, but because the house needed it, and she needed the house to need it, needed the structure of purpose in a place that was new and uncertain. The grounding function of a task that asked only that you do it well. She scrubbed the kitchen top to bottom. She took stock of the pantry and the root cellar and made a list on a scrap of paper of what was there and what was needed. She boiled water and stripped the 2 children's beds and hung the sheets on the line, then remade them with a precision her mother had taught her when she was 7 years old. She found a curtain rod that had come loose from its bracket in the main room, and she fixed it with a nail she found in the small workshop off the kitchen, which had every tool anyone had ever needed, organized with the meticulous care of a man who knew where his hands were in the dark. She found in the back of the linen cupboard a quilt that had been folded away with a care that told her immediately it was not practical storage, but something more particular. She unfolded it. It was beautiful, hand-pieced in a pattern she recognized as a double wedding ring, in colors that had faded with age, to a softness that was lovelier than the original brightness would have been. She held it for a long moment, understanding what it was and who had made it, and then she folded it back along its original lines and returned it to the cupboard with the same care she had found it in. Ruth Walker's quilt was not hers to use, but it was hers to respect. She had bread proofing by 10 in the morning and a pot of bean soup with salt pork by noon. When Tom Bridger came to the back door for dinner, he stopped when he smelled the soup and stood on the step for a moment with an expression of uncomplicated gratitude. "You must be Miss Whitfield," he said. "I'm Tom Bridger." "I know," Clara said. "Come in and eat." "Yes, ma'am," Tom said. And he said it with the ease of a man who meant it, which was different from courtesy, and Clara knew which was which. The young man Carver appeared behind him, taller, angular, with the particular energy of youth that hadn't yet decided whether it wanted to be charming or bold, and had settled on attempting both simultaneously. He pulled off his hat and looked at the soup pot with the kind of focused reverence that Clara had seen before in men who had been eating their own cooking for too long. "Is that real bread?" Carver said. "The only kind there is," Clara said. Carver sat down. "Tom," he said, "I think I'm going to like this." "She's not here for your benefit," Tom said. "I know that. I'm just saying." Carver looked at Clara with the directness of someone who truly could not be indirect. Mr. Walker's been trying to make bread for 2 years. It's always flat. So Lily told me. Lily's 8 years old, and she's already more honest than most adults I know. Carver accepted a bowl of soup. She's also terrifying. She's 8, Clara said. Yes, ma'am. Terrifyingly 8. Tom ate with quiet concentration and said little which Clara respected. When he finished, he carried his bowl to the wash basin and cleaned it himself without being asked, which told her everything she needed to know about Tom Bridger's character and the kind of household he had been trying to support. Ethan came in last. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the soup and the bread and the room, and Clara watched him trying to find something to say about it that wasn't too much. "You didn't have to do all this today," he said finally. "No," she agreed. "But I wanted to." He sat down and ate, and for a moment the kitchen had 4 people in it. Tom with his second cup of coffee, Carver with his third piece of bread, Ethan with his soup and his careful silence, and Clara at the counter making a list of what she'd need from the general store in town. The ordinary noise of people sharing a meal, no performance, no particular significance being assigned to it. For Clara, it was the most significant moment of her year. The children came back from school at 4 o'clock. Samuel came in first and went directly to the kitchen and stood at the counter and looked at the remaining bread with an expression of serious intent. "Can I?" he asked. "There's butter in the crock," Clara said. He cut himself a piece with a focus that suggested he had been thinking about it all the way home, then carried it to the table and ate it slowly, the way a child eats something he doesn't want to end. Lily came in second, and she came in differently. She came in already talking the words, starting before the door was all the way open, and the words were about a girl at school named Lucy Marsh, who had said something about the stitching on Lily's pinafore that was apparently of significant offense. "She said it was crooked," Lily said, dropping her school bag on the bench. "It isn't crooked, it's just the way the fabric pulled when Papa mended it. He didn't do it wrong, he just—" She stopped. She had apparently just noticed for the first time that the house smelled different. She looked around. She looked at the curtain that was hanging straight now. She looked at the floor that had been swept, and the table that had been wiped down, and the bread on the counter. She looked at Clara. "The stitching in question," Clara said carefully, "was your father's or someone else's before him?" Lily processed the question. "Papa's. He tried to fix it after the seam came apart." "Bring it to me tomorrow morning. I'll fix it properly. Lucy Marsh won't have anything to say." Lily looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. Not gratitude exactly, but a slight recalibration. The look of a child who has just discovered that the person she had decided to be suspicious of might require a more complicated category. "Do you know how to fix pinafore seams?" Lily asked. "I know how to fix everything that can be sewn," Clara said. "Papa said you're a seamstress." "Among other things." Lily pulled out her chair and sat down and looked at her brother eating his bread. "She's going to fix the pinafore," she told Samuel. Samuel nodded without looking up from the bread. "Aren't you going to say something about that?" Lily demanded. "Good," Samuel said. Lily looked at Clara again. "He's impossible," she said. "He seems practical to me," Clara said. Lily stared at her. And then quickly, as if she hadn't meant to allow it, she almost smiled. That evening after supper, after the children had done their lessons and been guided toward bed, Clara sat at the kitchen table with her list and the small amount of money Ethan had set out for supplies. She was going through the pantry inventory when she heard his boots on the floor, and he came and sat across from her. "How was today?" he asked. "Good," she said. "That's all." She looked up. "What would you like me to say?" He leaned back in his chair. "Nothing in particular. It was strange coming in at noon and the house being—" He stopped. "Being what?" "Being like it used to be," he said quietly. Clara set down her pencil. She looked at him across the table with the particular directness she reserved for things that mattered. "I found the quilt in the linen cupboard," she said. "Your wife's quilt. I didn't use it. I put it back." Something moved through Ethan Walker's face. It was not grief exactly, or not only grief. It was something more complicated. the expression of a man who was surprised to be understood without having explained himself. "Thank you," he said. "Of course." "She made it the first winter we were married," Ethan said. "She was not a patient woman about most things. She was very patient about that quilt. It's beautiful work. She would have..." He stopped and started again. "She would have had things to say about the current state of this house. She'd have been direct about it." "And now it's better," Clara said simply. "Because of you." "Because of both of us," Clara said. "You drove 4 miles in the dark, on the word of a 71-year-old woman who told you to hurry." He looked at her. "May's not usually wrong." "No," Clara said. "She isn't." They sat in the quiet of the kitchen for another few minutes. The fire in the stove had settled to a steady low heat. Outside the window, the Wyoming night was black and cold and enormous. Inside, the lamp on the table threw a circle of light that was warm enough to reach both of them. "Samuel ate 4 pieces of bread," Ethan said. "I know. He hasn't eaten like that since..." He paused. "He's been small for his appetite, since Ruth died." "He'll be fine," Clara said. "Not as a comfort, as a fact." "You sound certain about that." "I'm certain about children who are paying attention," she said. "Samuel is paying close attention. He's deciding what to do with what he sees. He'll come to his own conclusions on his own schedule." She picked up the pencil again. "Don't rush him." Ethan watched her for a moment. "You've been around children before. I spent 3 years in a house with 7 of them. Cousin's household outside Jefferson City. I was 18. She didn't look up from the list. "Children are not complicated if you are honest with them and you do what you say you will." "Is that a general principle?" "It's a specific one. Most adults make children complicated by lying to them about small things and expecting them not to notice." She looked up. "Lily noticed everything today. She made a note of every single thing that changed in this house. She didn't say anything about most of it." Yes. That's Lily." "She's watching to see if it holds," Clara said. "She's seen things change before and then go back to the way they were. She wants to know if this is real." "Is it?" Ethan asked. And Clara understood that the question was not only about Lily. She met his eyes. "I said 2 weeks. I'm still here after day 1. Ask me again in 13 days. The ghost of a real smile crossed his face. It was the first full one she had seen, and it changed his face in a way that she filed away without examining too closely. "Fair enough," he said. He stood and took his coffee cup to the basin and set it down. At the doorway he paused. "The window in your room," he said. "I noticed when I came up to get your bag. I've got weather stripping. I'll fix it tomorrow morning before I go out." Clara looked at him. "You don't have to." "I know I don't," he said. And she recognized her own words from that morning from the kitchen, coming back to her with a different weight. He held her gaze for just a moment. "I want to." I was gone before she could respond to that, and she sat for another few minutes in the lamplight with her list and the quiet house around her and the sound of Wyoming wind outside the window, and she thought about the word want, the particular weight it had when a person said it honestly. She had spent so long around people who spoke in obligation. You should do this. You must do this. This is expected of you, that the simple declaration of a person wanting something, wanting it without justification or apology, had begun to feel foreign to her. She had stopped trusting it. She was not sure yet what to do with a man who said "I want" and meant it plainly, who drove 4 miles in the dark on a 71-year-old woman's word, and fixed a window without being asked. She was not sure, but she was paying attention. 3 days passed, and Clara began to understand the rhythm of the ranch, the way you learn a language, not all at once, but in accumulated moments of comprehension, each one connecting to the last, until meaning started to emerge. She learned that Tom Bridger whistled the same 4 bars of a hymn every morning when he was working well, and stopped when something was troubling him, and that Ethan always noticed, and always found a way to address the trouble, without making Tom feel managed. She learned that Carver's absolute inability to be indirect was more gift than liability, because it meant she always knew exactly what was happening with the younger cattle hands, and what the mood of the bunkhouse was delivered with the cheerful precision of a man who genuinely believed honesty was simply the efficient choice. She learned that Ethan Walker was in the habit of working past the point of exhaustion, and then sitting in the kitchen for 30 minutes with a cup of cold coffee before he let himself go to bed. She had come down for water on the second night and found him like that, sitting straight in his chair, but with the particular stillness of a man whose body had given out on him without permission. She had not woken him. She had covered him with the wool blanket from the hook near the door and gone back upstairs and thought about what it meant to carry that much alone. She learned about Lily in layers. The girl was formidable. That word was not an exaggeration, with a mind that processed what it saw and drew conclusions that were sometimes more accurate than they should have been for 8 years of living. She watched Clara work with the focused assessment of someone taking inventory, not hostile, but not warm. And then one afternoon, she appeared in the kitchen doorway with her mending basket and a question she had clearly been sitting on for some time. "Can you teach me?" she said. Clara was mending one of Samuel's shirts. "Teach you what?" "To sew like that, with the small stitches." Clara looked at the shirt, then at Lily. "Sit down." Lily sat. Clara found a scrap of fabric and a needle and thread, and she showed Lily how to pull the needle through at a consistent angle, how to measure the distance between stitches by feel rather than by sight, how to end a seam so it held. Lily was not naturally patient about it. Her first attempts were uneven, and she looked at them with an expression of pure offense. "They're too big," Lily said. "They're first attempts," Clara said. "They're too big." Lily looked at Clara's stitches and back at her own. "How long did it take you to do it that small?" "A while. It didn't matter how long." Lily looked at her. "Why not?" "Because I kept doing it until I could. The time it took didn't change the fact that I was going to keep trying until I got there." Lily stared at her. "Mama was like that," she said quietly, with the particular care of a child placing a fragile thing very precisely. Clara did not fill the silence. She waited. She said giving up on something was just deciding you couldn't do it before you tried enough times. Lily continued. She was looking at her stitches now, not at Clara. She said the trying was the actual thing, not the finishing. "She was right," Clara said. "I know." Lily picked up her needle and tried another stitch. It was smaller this time. Not perfect. Smaller. "I know she was right," she repeated in a voice that held everything and revealed just enough of it. Clara sat beside her and kept working, and neither of them spoke for a while, and the kitchen held them both in the particular warmth of two people who had decided without announcing it to trust each other with a little more than they'd intended to. The first real test came on the 5th night. Ethan had ridden into town that afternoon for supplies, and he had not come back by supper time. Clara fed the children and got Samuel to bed, and was sitting with Lily, who was resolutely not going to sleep until her father was home, when the sound of horses came fast, and then the sound of voices more than one, and she recognized Ethan's, but not the others. She told Lily to stay inside, and she went to the front door. Nathan Caldwell was on horseback in the yard. He had 2 men with him, hired men from the look of them, the kind of men rich young men paid to make their presence heavier than it was alone. Ethan was standing between his horse and the house with the very particular stillness of a man who had decided the situation was going to end one specific way and was willing to wait it out. "Walker," Caldwell said, "you've got something that belongs to this town on your property." "My property doesn't belong to this town," Ethan said, "and neither do the people on it." "She's spreading stories about my family." "She hasn't been in town since she left it," Ethan said. "That's a fact." "People are talking." "People talk," Ethan said. "That doesn't make it your business." Caldwell's horse shifted, and he brought it under control with the rough impatience of a man who was not a natural rider. "I'm making it my business." Clara opened the front door. She had not planned to. But she was done with the particular feeling of being the subject of conversations she was not in, and she was done with the idea that she owed this man her invisibility, as if it were a debt she'd never agreed to incur. "Mr. Caldwell," she said. He looked at her. The entitlement in his expression was immediate and reflexive. The face of a man who had learned that looking at women a certain way usually produced the effect he wanted. "Miss Whitfield, you need to come back to town and correct the stories you've been—" "I haven't told any stories," Clara said. "I left town quietly. I haven't spoken your name to anyone since I got here. The fact that people are talking has nothing to do with me and everything to do with you, and I believe on some level you know that." Caldwell stared at her. "You told lies about me," Clara said. "She said it the way you state a thing that doesn't require argument, because it isn't an argument, it's a fact. You told them because I wouldn't be what you wanted me to be. And now you've ridden 4 miles out of town in the dark to try it again. And I'm telling you—" She stepped forward 1 step on the porch, which was a deliberate thing. "It won't work this time either." Ethan had turned when she opened the door, and she felt the quality of his attention on her back. Not intervening, not moving to take the conversation from her. Standing exactly where he was and letting her have it. Caldwell's expression had moved through surprise and settled into something uglier. "You don't know what I can do to this ranch's reputation. My family has connections. Walker's cattle sales, his contracts. Then do it," Ethan said from where he was standing very quietly. "Try it. And then find out what happens when a man with no genuine grievance starts making threats against his neighbors for sheltering a woman he harassed." He paused. "May Holbrook has a very good memory, Nathan, and she is not afraid of your father." A long silence. Caldwell looked from Ethan to Clara and back. Whatever he had expected to find when he rode out here, whatever version of Clara Whitfield, who could be frightened or shamed or compelled by his presence, was not standing on this porch. He wheeled his horse without another word. His hired men followed, and the sound of hooves diminished into the Wyoming dark and then disappeared. Clara stood on the porch for a moment after they were gone. Her hands were steady. She noticed that with a particular kind of satisfaction. Ethan came up the steps and stood beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment. When he did speak, his voice was low and careful, the way you speak when you are saying something you have been meaning to say but have been waiting for the right moment. "I didn't stop you," he said. "I know. I wasn't sure you'd want me to." "I didn't," she said. "Thank you." He looked at her. In the dark his face was mostly shadow, but she could see the line of his jaw and the steadiness of his eyes. "You are not what most people in this situation would be," he said. "What would most people be? Afraid, quiet, waiting for someone else to handle it." Clara looked out at the dark road where Caldwell had gone. "I've been afraid and quiet and waiting for a long time," she said. It didn't seem to help. Ethan was silent for a moment. "No," he said. "I don't suppose it did." From inside the house came the sound of small feet. Lily, who had not stayed inside because Lily never stayed inside when something was happening. She appeared in the doorway with her dark hair loose and her expression calibrated to maximum information gathering. "Who was that?" she demanded. "A man from town," Ethan said. "What did he want?" "To make trouble," Ethan said. "Clara handled it." Lily looked at Clara. Her assessment was swift and thorough. "Did you tell him off?" she said. "I told him the truth," Clara said. Lily processed this. "Same thing," she said. And she turned and went back inside, as if this settled the matter to her complete satisfaction. Ethan watched his daughter disappear, and then looked back at Clara with an expression she had not seen on him before. It was not admiration, or not simply admiration. It was closer to relief, the particular relief of a man who has been worried about something important for a long time, and has just been given a reason to worry a little less. "Come inside," he said. "It's cold." She did, and standing in the warmth of the kitchen, with the fire low in the stove, and Samuel asleep in the back room and Lily's footsteps already quiet overhead. Clara thought, this is day 5. She thought 13 more days and then a decision. She thought I am already not sure the 13 days are the actual question. Part 3. 8 days and Clara stopped counting. She hadn't decided to stop. It just happened the way certain habits dissolve, not because you choose to release them, but because one morning you realize you've already let them go, and you can't pinpoint the exact moment it occurred. She had been tracking the days the way you track the days, left in a sentence you didn't ask for, marking each one off as proof that the end was still coming, that the door was still open, that she still had a choice. And then, on the morning of the 8th day, she got up before the sun, and built the kitchen fire, and put the coffee on, and stood in the warmth of it, and realized she had not thought about the stagecoach in 3 days. That alarmed her more than she expected. She was stirring the oatmeal when Ethan came in, boots already on, coat half-buttoned, hair not quite attended to, with the particular forward momentum of a man whose mind had gotten ahead of his body by several hours. He stopped when he saw the coffee already poured and sitting at his usual place at the table. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. "You didn't have to. I was already up," she said. He sat down and wrapped both hands around the cup. "Tom says the north fence came down overnight. Post-rot. I'll be out most of the day. I'll have dinner ready when you're back." He looked at her over the rim of the cup. "You've said that every morning for 8 days. Because it's been true every morning for 8 days. He set the cup down and was quiet for a moment. "Clara." She looked up at the way he said her name. He had not called her by her first name before. It was always Miss Whitfield, correct, careful, maintaining a line he had been disciplined about. Her name in his voice, without the formality in front of it, had a different weight. She looked at him directly. "I need you to know something," he said. "This isn't what you're doing here these past 8 days. It isn't something I take for granted. I want you to know that." "All right," she said carefully. "And I need you to know that whatever you decide at the end of the 2 weeks, I'll respect it. If you want to go, I'll take you back. I'll put you on whatever stagecoach you name, and I'll give you 3 months' wages because you've already earned them." "Ethan." "I'm not finished," he said, and she closed her mouth. "What I'm trying to say is that I don't want you to stay because you feel obligated, because you've been here long enough that leaving feels rude, because you think those children need you too much for you to go." He paused. "They do need you. That's true. But I don't want that to be the reason." Clara set the spoon down. She turned from the stove and looked at him squarely. "What do you want the reason to be?" He held her gaze. "I want you to want to stay. Not because you have nowhere else to go. Because you want to be here." He picked up his coffee again, something to do with his hands. "That's what I want." The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. "I'll think about it," Clara said. "That's all I'm asking." "Good." She picked up the spoon again. "Now drink your coffee before it goes cold and go fix your fence." He stood, and she could hear in the absence of his words that he was deciding whether to say something else. He put his hat on and went to the door. "Clara," he said again at the doorway. "Go fix your fence, Ethan." And he went. And Clara stood at the stove and thought about the word want, about how it had landed differently this time than the first time he'd used it, about how it had reached something in her that she had been keeping behind a door that she had told herself was locked, but was apparently only closed. She stirred the oatmeal and did not think about the stagecoach at all. Lily appeared at 7, already dressed, already in the full possession of her opinions, and she set her mended pinafore on the table next to her bowl and looked at Clara. "It held," she said. "I know it held. I fixed it." Lucy Marsh said it looked professional. "Good." She asked who fixed it. Lily sat down and poured her own honey with the precise amount she had been calibrating all week. "I told her the woman staying with us." "What did she say?" "She said she'd heard stories." Lily said this with a flat evenness that was clearly practiced. "I told her stories were for people with nothing better to think about. Then I walked away." Clara set the oatmeal down in front of her. "That's very diplomatic of you." "I wasn't being diplomatic," Lily said. "I meant it." "I know you did." Lily looked at her across the table. "Are the stories true?" "No." "I know they're not," Lily said. "I just wanted to hear you say it." "Why?" Lily picked up her spoon and considered. "Because you say things straight. You don't dress them up. When you say something isn't true, it isn't true. I can tell the difference." She ate a bite of oatmeal. Most grown-ups can't say a simple thing without making it complicated. "You're 8 years old," Clara said. I know how old I am. At 8 years old, you've already figured out something most people take 40 years to learn. Lily looked up at that, and behind her careful expression was something younger and less armored, a child who was hungry for that kind of acknowledgement, and trying very hard not to show how hungry she was. What did I figure out? That the way a person says a thing tells you more than the thing itself. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she ate another bite of oatmeal and said with great deliberateness, "You should stay." Clara looked at her. "After the 2 weeks," Lily said, "you should stay." "That's my decision to make," Clara said carefully. "I know it is." Lily kept eating. "I'm just telling you what I think. You said I should say what I think." "I never said that." "You said you could tell when I meant something, which means you were listening to what I actually thought, which means you wanted me to think out loud." Lily looked up with the specific satisfaction of a logician completing a proof. "So, you should stay." Clara sat down across from her. She had not planned to sit. She was in the middle of a dozen things, but she sat down because the moment required it. "Lily," she said, "I'm not your mother." "I know that," Lily said. Quiet, direct, no armor in it. "I know exactly who you are and who you aren't. I'm not confused about it. I just wanted to make sure. You're not her. You're you." Lily looked at her with those dark eyes that had seen too much for 8 years and processed all of it with a thoroughness that was both her gift and her burden. "And I think you being you is enough." Clara held that for a moment. She was not going to cry at the kitchen table in front of this formidable 8-year-old. She was absolutely not going to do that. "Eat your oatmeal," she said, "or you'll be late." "I'm never late," Lily said, and went back to eating with the serenity of a person who has said what they needed to say and is now entirely at peace with the conversation. Samuel came in 10 minutes after his sister and ate half a piece of bread and looked at Clara and said, "Are you staying?" "I don't know yet," Clara said. Samuel nodded as if this were a reasonable answer. "Okay," he said, and went back to his bread. And then very quietly, without looking up, "I hope you do." Clara pressed her hand flat on the countertop and breathed. Both children were gone to school and the house was hers again, in the way it had started to feel like hers. Not possessed but inhabited, tended, something she was in relationship with. She was finishing the breakfast cleanup when she heard the back door open and looked up expecting Tom or Carver. It was a woman she had not seen before. She was about 50, broad-shouldered, with a face that had been pretty in youth and had aged into something more useful than pretty. She was carrying a covered dish, and she was looking at Clara with an expression that was neither friendly nor hostile, but something more careful, the look of a person who is deciding something. "You're Miss Whitfield," the woman said. "I am," Clara said. "I'm Agnes Greer. My husband works the farm 2 miles east. We've been neighbors to Ethan Walker for 11 years. She set the covered dish on the table. "I heard he'd brought someone out from town. I came to see for myself." "And," Clara said. Agnes Greer looked at her steadily. "And you're not what the Caldwell boy's been saying you are." "No," Clara said. "I'm not. I could have told you that from what May Holbrook said. May doesn't misread people." Agnes pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited, which Clara found she did not mind. "I brought a rhubarb pie. The children like it." "That's kind of you." "It's not kindness," Agnes said. "It's practicality. This ranch has been running on half a heart for 3 years. It needed more than one person carrying it." She looked at Clara with blunt assessment. "You're planning to stay. I'm considering it. What's giving you pause?" Clara looked at her. It was a direct question from a woman who clearly had no patience for indirection, and after 8 days, in a house full of people who spoke plainly. The question felt less intrusive than it might have 2 weeks ago. "I've started over in a lot of places," Clara said. "I've learned to be careful about starting over somewhere and convincing myself it's different before I know if it actually is." Agnes was quiet for a moment. "Fair," she said. "That's fair." She stood and adjusted her coat. "I'll say this, and then I'll leave you to it, because you strike me as a woman who doesn't need to be talked at. Ethan Walker is a decent man, not a perfect man. He works too hard, and he talks too little, and he has spent 3 years trying to be two people and failing at being either properly. But he's decent, which is rarer than it ought to be. And those children—" She paused. "Those children need what they haven't had in 3 years, which is someone who's going to be consistent. Who's going to be there tomorrow morning the same as she was this morning." She looked at Clara directly. "You understand what I'm saying?" "I do," Clara said. "Good." Agnes moved toward the door. "I'll come back Thursday. I can help with the heavier mending if you've got a pile of it." "I always have a pile of it," Clara said. Agnes almost smiled. "Of course you do." She went out, and Clara listened to her footsteps cross the yard and thought about the word consistent and about what it meant to be the person who showed up the same way morning after morning in a house that had been waiting for exactly that. The day passed quickly in the way days did when there was enough to fill them. She baked. She mended. She went through the linen cupboard and organized it with a system that made sense. She found a loose floorboard in Samuel's room and located the hammer and nails in Ethan's workshop and fixed it herself because it needed fixing, and she was there, and she could. When she was done, she stood in Samuel's room and looked at the space, his small bed, his one shelf with 3 books on it, the drawing he had pinned above his headboard that she had not examined closely before. She looked at it now. It was a crayon drawing the specific ambitious imprecision of a 5-year-old's art, and it showed 3 figures, one tall, one medium height, one small. The tall one had what appeared to be a hat. The small one had what appeared to be extremely round cheeks, which Clara recognized as Samuel's rendering of himself. The medium figure was between them, slightly closer to the small one, with something in one hand that Samuel had clearly intended to be a bread loaf. Clara stared at that drawing for a long moment. Then she went back downstairs and put more wood on the fire. When Ethan came in at dusk, his coat was wet through and his hands were cold, and he had the particular weight of a man who had spent 10 hours doing physical work in bad conditions and was running entirely on stubbornness. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and for a moment just stood there, not moving, taking in the warmth and the smell of the pot on the stove. "Fence," Clara said. "Done," he said. "Replaced 4 posts. Tom got the wire strung." He pulled off his coat and hung it and moved to the stove and stood near it without apology, warming his hands. "Cold out." "Sit down. There's hot coffee." He sat down. She poured the coffee and put the mug in front of him and then turned back to the stove, and when she glanced back at him, she saw that he was sitting exactly as she had found him 3 nights ago, straight-backed, but still the particular stillness of complete exhaustion. Except this time, his eyes were open, watching her. "Agnes Greer came this morning," Clara said. "She would," Ethan said. "She's been worried about this household for 3 years. She'll have come to assess. She brought a rhubarb pie." "What was her verdict?" Clara looked at him. "She didn't say. She didn't need to." She paused. "She told me you're a decent man." Something moved through Ethan's expression, quiet and private. "Agnes is generous." "Agnes isn't generous," Clara said. "I've known her for 6 hours, and I can already tell she's accurate, which means if she says you're decent, she means it exactly." He looked at his coffee cup. "She's been a good neighbor. She said you've been running this ranch on half a heart for 3 years." He went still. "I think she's right," Clara said. Not gently, she was not performing gentleness. She was saying it straight, because he was the kind of man who received straight things better than padded ones, because she had learned that about him in 8 days, as surely as she'd learned anything. "I think you've been doing the work of keeping everything alive, and I think that's cost you something." "It's cost everyone something," Ethan said quietly. "Yes, it has." She came and sat across him because the conversation required it. "Ethan, why did you really come to that door?" He looked up. "I told you." May said. "May told you about me 6 months ago," Clara said. "Agnes told me so. She said May's been talking about a woman in town who needed a real chance. She said May's been talking about it since late summer." She held his gaze. "You waited until I was leaving. You drove out at 4 in the morning when you had a fence to fix and cattle to manage and 2 children to get to school. You came to that door at the last possible moment." She paused. "Why?" Ethan was quiet for a long time. The fire in the stove made small sounds. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the window that he had fixed on the second morning with weather stripping and a patience that she had been thinking about ever since. "Because I was afraid," he said. "Of what? Of what it meant. If I went." He looked at her with the difficulty of a man who is reaching for words that have been out of practice. "Bringing someone into this house, it isn't a small thing. It isn't just about the cooking and the mending and someone to be here with the children. It's—" He stopped. Started again. "Ruth has been gone 3 years. And for 3 years I've told myself what this ranch needed was practical help. Someone to manage things. I told myself if I put it in practical terms, it was simpler. Safer. Safer than what?" He looked at her. "Than admitting I was lonely," he said. "That I'd been lonely since the day she died, and I hadn't known how to say that to anyone, including myself." The kitchen was very quiet. "So you waited until you had no more time to wait," Clara said. "Until it was that morning or never." "Yes," he said. "And I almost didn't go. I sat in this kitchen the night before and told myself May was wrong. I was being foolish. The last thing I needed was to drive into town and make myself look—" He stopped. "Human," Clara said. He almost smiled. "I was going to say desperate." "Same thing sometimes," Clara said. He looked at her with that expression she had started to recognize, the one that was not admiration and not appraisal, but something that paid her the specific compliment of full attention, of being truly seen. "You're doing it again," he said. "Doing what?" "Saying the thing directly. The thing I was circling around." He shook his head slightly. "You do that. You just say it, like it's simple." "It is simple. The circling is what makes things complicated." "How do you do that?" he said. "After what that town did to you, after everything. How do you still say things straight without—" He searched for the word. "Without armor." Clara thought about that. She thought about the suitcase she had packed in the dark, about the window that hadn't closed, about the boarding house door and Mrs. Pruitt's expression of inconvenience, about Nathan Caldwell's horse in the yard 5 days ago and her own hand steady at her sides. "I had armor," she said. "I put it on every morning for 14 months, and I packed it in the suitcase when I left." She met his eyes. "I was done needing it for the people in that town. I'm not interested in needing it here." Something shifted in Ethan Walker's face that she had not seen before and could not entirely name. It was not simply emotion. He was not a man who moved through emotions quickly or publicly. It was more like the quality of a man who has just set down a weight he had forgotten he was carrying. "Good," he said, very quietly. "Good." They sat in the kitchen until the fire needed tending and the children needed checking, and the ordinary demands of the evening came back into themselves, and neither of them spoke much more. But something had changed in the quality of the quiet between them, and both of them knew it, and neither of them named it aloud, because it was too new and too careful for naming. It was Lily who broke things open, as Lily generally did, and she broke them open 6 days later, in the way that children do important things, sideways without warning in the middle of something else entirely. She had been helping Clara sort dried beans at the kitchen table, which was the kind of task Lily had discovered she could tolerate, because it allowed her to talk while doing something with her hands. She had been talking about school, and about Lucy Marsh, and about a book she was reading, and Clara had been listening and sorting and responding in the way she had learned Lily needed, not continuously, but at the right intervals, so the girl knew she was heard without feeling examined. And then Lily stopped talking mid-sentence, and looked at Clara with an expression Clara had not seen on her before. "Did you love someone before?" Lily said. Clara looked up. "That's a sudden question." "I've been thinking about it," Lily said. "I want to know." Clara sorted 3 more beans. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I want to know if you know what it's like to love someone and then have them gone." Lily's voice was steady in the way of someone who has practiced being steady about something that does not actually feel steady at all. "Not just a parent. Someone you chose." "No," Clara said. "I haven't had that." Lily looked at her carefully. Are you sad about that? Sometimes, Clara said honestly. Do you think you could, Lily asked, love someone you chose, if it was the right person? The kitchen was very still. Clara could hear the wind outside, and the sound of Tom Bridger whistling in the yard, and the far-off low of cattle, and the fire inside the stove. She could hear all of it with a specific clarity that told her the moment was one of those that mattered, the kind that looked ordinary from the outside, but was not ordinary at all. Yes, she said. I think I could. Lily looked at her for a long moment. Then she went back to sorting beans. Okay, she said. Lily. I'm not saying anything, Lily said. I'm just sorting beans. You're not just sorting beans. Lily kept her eyes on her hands. Papa doesn't talk about things like that, she said quietly. He doesn't say it out loud. He thinks if he doesn't say things out loud, they won't be real yet. She paused. But I can see it. I can see him when you're in the room. He's different. Clara did not ask how. She did not need to. He smiles, Lily said simply. He didn't used to. Not for a long time. She picked up a bean and set it aside. I just wanted to know if you could. She stopped, and for the first time in 14 days, Clara saw the 8-year-old behind all of the competence and all of the guarding the child who was terrified of loving something again and having it leave. If it was possible. For you. It's possible, Clara said. Lily nodded once, firmly, as if she had received the information she came for and had filed it where it needed to go. Good, she said. That's good. That night was when the storm came in. Not a surprise exactly. The sky had been building toward it all day in a way that Tom Bridger had been reading since morning. The quality of cold that came with serious weather, the way the cattle had been moving. But when it arrived with the commitment of a Wyoming winter storm that had decided not to make small gestures, and by 9 o'clock the wind had reached the kind of volume that made conversation in the house require slightly more effort, and by 10 the snow was hitting the windows in a way that was not casual. Ethan had been outside twice checking on the animals, and came in the second time with his coat carrying a weight of snow and his face reddened from cold. He shook off the coat and stood by the stove, and Tom came in behind him, and they conferred in low voices about the cattle and the barn and what needed doing before morning. Clara had the children in bed. She had banked the fires in both bedrooms and checked both windows and come back to the kitchen to find the two men at the table with a map of the ranch spread between them, talking about the North Range. How bad? She asked. Tom looked up. Could be a 3-day blow, he said. Maybe more. The pass will close by morning. She looked at Ethan. The pass to town? Yes. He met her eyes. Which means, if you want to leave before the 2 weeks. He said it without expression, just the fact of it. We'd have to go tonight, in the next hour. Clara stood in the kitchen of the house where she had spent 14 days building something she could not have named precisely at the beginning, and could not stop thinking about now. She looked at Ethan's face, the steadiness of it, the tiredness of it, the way he was very carefully not trying to influence her answer. She thought about the stagecoach. She thought about West. She thought about Samuel's drawing pinned above his bed. She thought about Lily sorting beans with her eyes down, asking the question she was terrified to ask. She thought about a window fixed with weather stripping on the second morning by a man who wanted to not had to not ought to, but wanted to. I told you 2 weeks, she said. I have 2 days left. I know, Ethan said. The storm changes things. The storm doesn't change things, Clara said. I'm not going out in a blizzard for a stagecoach to somewhere I haven't decided on yet. I'm staying until the 2 weeks are done. And then... She paused. And then, Ethan said very quietly. And then we'll talk, she said. Tom Bridger, who had been looking intently at the map, stood and folded it and said with great neutrality, I'll go check on the horses, and left the kitchen without looking at either of them. Ethan stood across the table from Clara, and the storm howled outside, and the fire in the stove was warm and steady and real. You're not afraid, he said. I'm terrified, she said. That's different from afraid. Being afraid means you run from it. Terrified means it matters enough to stay with. He looked at her with that full, steady, uncomplicated attention. "What matters enough?" he said. And it was a careful question, a precise question, the question of a man who had decided to stop circling. Clara looked at him across the kitchen in the warmth of the house she had tended for 14 days, in the life she had walked into at 4 in the morning when she could have kept walking. "This," she said. "All of this." She held his gaze. "You know what I mean." I did. She could see that he did. And Ethan Walker, who talked too little and worked too hard and had been carrying everything alone for 3 years, reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Just that. Just his hand on hers, warm and certain, and saying everything neither of them had been ready to say out loud until this moment. Outside, the storm declared itself with everything it had. Inside, the fire held. Clara did not move her hand. Part 4. The storm lasted 4 days. Not 3 as Tom Bridger had predicted, because Wyoming weather in November operated on its own schedule and had no particular interest in human estimates. On the second day, the wind dropped enough to give the illusion that it was ending, and then on the third day, it came back harder than the first, and by the fourth morning, the snow was packed against the north wall of the barn to a height that required Ethan and Carver to dig their way out before they could begin the regular work of keeping animals alive. Clara did not mind. She discovered this about herself with some surprise on the morning of the second day, standing at the kitchen window with coffee in her hand, watching the white erasure of everything beyond 20 feet, and realizing that she felt not trapped, but settled. The storm had drawn the world to a manageable size. There was this house and the people in it, and the work of keeping them fed and warm and occupied, and all of that fit inside the hours of a day with room to breathe. Samuel had decided on the first full storm day that he was going to teach Clara a card game. He explained this with the seriousness of a professor outlining a curriculum, pulling out a worn deck from a shelf in the main room and laying it on the kitchen table while she kneaded bread dough. "You can keep doing that," he said, gesturing at the bread. "I'll explain the rules while you work." "That's considerate," Clara said. "The game is called War," Samuel said. "It's easy, but it takes a long time, which is good because we have time." "We do have time," Clara agreed. I explained the rules with meticulous care and a seriousness of purpose that was entirely his own, the same quality he brought to eating bread and to asking whether she was staying, and to every other matter he had decided was worth his full attention. Clara listened and kneaded and asked questions at the right intervals, and by the time the bread was shaped and set to rise, she understood War completely, and Samuel looked satisfied in the way of a teacher whose student has performed adequately. "We can play after lunch," he said, collecting the cards. "I'll look forward to it," Clara said. He stopped at the kitchen door and looked back at her. "Clara," he said. "Yes." "You're good at listening," he said. "Most grown-ups listen like they're waiting for you to stop talking. You actually listen." Clara looked at this 5-year-old boy with the old soul eyes and the economy of words that somehow always landed precisely where they needed to. "You're worth listening to," she said. Samuel considered this. "Okay," he said, and went back to his room. Lily had spent the storm days alternating between her book, her sewing. She had graduated from practice scraps to an actual project. A pillowcase she was hemming with growing precision, and an ongoing analysis of everything Clara did in the kitchen that she delivered in the running commentary of someone who was trying to memorize a skill set as fast as possible. On the third morning, she appeared at Clara's elbow while Clara was rolling pie crust and watched in silence for a full 2 minutes before speaking. "Your hands do it differently than Papa does," Lily said. "How did your father do it?" "He pushed down too hard. The edges got thin and the middle stayed thick." "You press and push forward at the same time," Clara said. "Then turn, like this." She demonstrated. "The warmth in your hands is the enemy. Work fast." Lily watched. "Can I try?" Clara stepped back and gave her the rolling pin. Lily pressed and pushed with great concentration. The crust was not even, it pulled in places and resisted in others. But she worked at it with a determination that Clara had come to recognize as this girl's signature mode of engagement with anything she had decided mattered. "Better," Clara said. "It's still not right." It's better than first attempts usually are, Clara said. That's all first attempts need to be. Lily kept rolling. My mother could do this, she said, quiet, not looking up. She could do everything in a kitchen. Papa always said she made it look like it wasn't work. The best cooks make it look that way, Clara said. It is work. They've just done it long enough that the hard parts became natural. Did your mother teach you? Most of it. I taught myself the rest. Lily looked up at that. Why'd you have to teach yourself? She died when I was 19, Clara said. After that, I was on my own. Lily held the rolling and looked at her with an expression that was doing something complicated, making a connection. The specific kind of connection that children make when they recognize their own shape of pain in another person's story. That's young, Lily said. Yes, Clara said. It is. Were you scared being alone that young? Terrified, Clara said. Every day for a long time. But you kept going, Lily said. It wasn't a question. I kept going, Clara said. Lily looked back at the pie crust and resumed rolling with a quiet focus that told Clara the question had been answered to her satisfaction, not just about pie, not just about mothers, but about something larger and more personal that she had needed to know. I'm going to keep going too, Lily said, simply firmly as if she were signing a document. I know you are, Clara said. I've known that since the first morning. Ethan came in at midday on the second storm day and found his children at the kitchen table. Samuel triumphantly winning the fourth consecutive hand of war, while Lily looked on with an expression of barely contained competitive irritation at a game she had decided was beneath her, yet kept watching with intense focus. He stood in the doorway of his own kitchen and looked at this scene for a moment, coat still on snow, still on his shoulders, and the expression on his face was one that Clara, crossing from the stove to the table with bowls of soup, caught for just a second before he rearranged it. She had seen that expression once before, on a man on her father years ago, coming home from a long trip to find the house lit and dinner on, and his children at the table. The expression of a man who has been afraid without fully admitting it, that the thing he most needed might not be there when he got back, and who is overcome briefly and privately by the fact that it is. She set the soup bowls down and went back to the stove without saying anything about it. He sat down. He ate. He told Carver's latest tale of misadventure with a fence post and made both children laugh, and at one point he reached over and ruffled Samuel's hair in a gesture so unguarded and natural that Samuel leaned into it without interrupting his victory speech about war strategy, and the whole thing was so ordinary that it almost broke Clara's heart. Almost, because she was not going to cry at her own kitchen table. She had established this rule with herself, and she intended to keep it. It was on the third day of the storm in the afternoon that the knock came at the front door. Clara heard it first, because she was in the main room. She looked at the door with the particular stillness of a person who has learned to read the sound of knocks. Their intention, their weight, what they carry before the door opens. This one was not Caldwell. Caldwell knocked like a man who expected the door to open immediately. This was slower, tired. She opened it. The woman on the porch was perhaps 60, though she wore it hard. The kind of 60 that came from outdoor work, and not enough of some things, and too much of others. She had a shawl that wasn't sufficient for the weather, and the specific look of someone who had walked a considerable distance in conditions that had not been kind about it. I'm looking for Mr. Walker's place, the woman said. Her voice was steady, but thin, the steadiness of effort rather than ease. You found it, Clara said. Come in out of the cold. I don't want to impose. You walked here in a blizzard, Clara said. You're not imposing. Come in. The woman came in. Her name, she said, was Vera Holt. She had a place on the other side of the ridge, a small homestead she and her husband had worked for 12 years. Her husband had died in October. She had tried to manage through November alone. The storm had made the decision she'd been putting off for her. I'm not asking for charity, Vera said, sitting at the kitchen table with the hot coffee Clara had put in front of her, and the dignity of a woman who needed to be very clear about this. I heard Mr. Walker was a fair man. I can work. I can cook. I can tend animals. I can do laundry. I can do whatever needs doing. I just need a place to be until spring, when I can figure out the next thing. Clara looked at her. She thought about a 4 in the morning knock on a door in Red Willow. She thought about a voice that said, I don't want to impose to a door it wasn't sure would open. Let me get Ethan, Clara said. Ethan came in from the back, carrying the smell of barn and cold work, and stopped when he saw the woman at his kitchen table. Clara watched him take in the situation, the wet shawl, the coffee, the dignity, and she watched him make the same calculation she had made at the front door, and she watched him reach the same answer. Mrs. Holt, he said, pulling out a chair across from her. Tell me about your place, she told him. He listened the way Clara had seen him listen to Tom about the fence to Carver, about the cattle to his children, about their days with his full attention and without interruption. When she was done, he nodded once. We've got a room, he said. Small, but it's warm and it's yours. You work for your board whatever you can do, and you set the limits on that based on what you're able. We're not going to run you into the ground. Vera Holt looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Clara. Then she looked back down at her coffee cup with an expression Clara recognized from the inside. Thank you, she said quietly. That's thank you. Tom Bridger will ride out with you in the spring, and we'll see about the homestead, Ethan said. That's your land, and we're going to help you keep it if we can. He stood. Clara, is the back bedroom clear enough? Give me 20 minutes, Clara said. She had it ready in 15. Later after. Vera Holt was settled, and the children were in bed, and the storm had resumed its fourth-day declaration with somewhat less conviction than it had managed on day 3. Clara sat in the kitchen with Ethan and a pot of tea, and the particular quiet that comes after a day that has been full. You didn't hesitate, Ethan said. Neither did you. I had 5 more seconds than you, he said. You opened that door and made up your mind before I even knew she was there. Clara poured the tea. I know what it's like to need a door to open, she said. I wasn't going to leave her on the porch. Ethan watched her pour with the steady attentiveness that she had stopped trying to talk herself out of noticing. Clara, he said. Yes. The 2 weeks ended this morning. She set the teapot down. She looked at him. I know. You didn't say anything. Neither did you, she said. He turned his cup in his hands, the familiar gesture of a man finding his footing. I meant what I said before the storm. I don't want you to stay out of obligation. I know you did. She met his eyes. I'm not staying out of obligation. Then why are you staying? He said it directly the way she had taught him by example over 2 weeks of conversations. Just say the thing, say it plain, let it be what it is. Clara thought about all the ways she could answer that were partially true. She thought about the children, and about the house, and about Vera Holt in the back bedroom, and about Agnes Greer who was coming Thursday, and about Tom Bridger whistling his hymn in the yard. All of that was real. All of that was part of it. But it was not the center of it, and Ethan Walker had asked her a direct question, and she had never yet answered him with anything less than the direct thing. Because of you, she said. Because of this, what you are, the way you are. She held his gaze without flinching. Because you drove 4 miles in the dark when you were afraid to, and you fixed a window you didn't have to fix, and you stood in your own yard and told Nathan Caldwell that the people on your property weren't his business, and you gave a cold stranger a room without blinking. She paused. And because when I say something you actually hear it. Not just the words. The thing behind the words. She looked at him steadily. I haven't had that before. Not from anyone except May Holbrook. And May is 71 years old, and I love her dearly, but she's not. This isn't the same kind of thing. The kitchen was very still. Ethan set down his cup. He reached across the table, the same deliberate gesture as the night the storm began, and covered her hand with his. Clara Whitfield, he said. Will you stay? Not for 2 weeks. Not for a trial. Will you stay because this is where you belong? She felt the warmth of his hand and the weight of the question, and the particular terror of wanting something real enough to say yes to it out loud. Yes, she said. I'll stay. Something happened in Ethan Walker's face that she had not seen before and would remember for the rest of her life. Not a dramatic thing. Not what you might expect from a man who had spent 3 years carrying everything alone. It was quieter than that. It was relief so deep it had moved past the point of showing itself loudly and arrived at a stillness that was more moved than any outward expression would have been. He closed his eyes for just a moment, opened them. "All right," he said. His voice was not quite steady. "All right." "All right," she agreed. They sat in the kitchen until the fire needed tending, and this time, when he got up to tend it, he came back and sat not across from her, but beside her, and they finished their tea with their chairs close together, and the Wyoming storm quieting itself at last, outside the walls of the house, that had become without either of them fully deciding when the place they both called home. The storm broke on the 5th morning. The pass to town cleared by afternoon. And on the day after the pass cleared without any particular plan having been made. Clara drove into Red Willow with Ethan and both children, because Lily had determined that since Clara was staying, the town ought to be informed of this in some visible way. Lily had stated this at breakfast with the strategic clarity of a general, and had looked at her father and at Clara, until they both agreed, which had not taken long. May Holbrook was behind her counter when they came through the door. She looked at Clara. She looked at Ethan. She looked at the 2 children flanking them, and then back at Clara with the expression of a woman whose assessment had been confirmed to her complete satisfaction. "Well," May said. "Well," Clara said. "You look different," May said. "I'm the same." "No," May said with great certainty. "You're not." She came around the counter and took Clara's hands in both of hers, and she looked at her with the particular fierceness of a woman who has fought for something and watched it come right. "You look like someone who stopped bracing for the next blow," May said quietly. Clara felt something move through her chest that she did not have a word for. "May," she said. "Don't," May said firmly. "Don't do that. We don't have time for that. I have cinnamon rolls in the oven and you need to tell me everything." She looked past Clara at Ethan. "Walker, you did good." "I had good information," Ethan said. "You had excellent information," May corrected. She was already steering Clara toward the back of the bakery, talking at the speed of a woman who had been waiting to talk about something for months. "Now, start from when I sent him to find you. Tell me every single part." It was Agnes Greer who came to May's bakery that afternoon. She had seen the Walker wagon in front and come in direct from the feed store with her coat still buttoned, and it was Agnes who said without preamble to Ethan, while May had Clara in the back room, "I told her she should stay." "She told me," Ethan said. "Did it help?" "I think everything helped," Ethan said. "Including you driving out with that rhubarb pie." Agnes looked at him with her frank assessment. "Those children needed something they'd been missing," she said. "Tom Bridger told my husband the boy had barely been eating." "He's eating now," Ethan said. "I could tell. He's had 3 of May's rolls in the last 20 minutes. Agnes glanced toward where Samuel was working his way through a pastry with the same dedicated focus he brought to all eating. "Walker, I want to say something plain." "Say it." "Don't let her go," Agnes said. "Not with doubts, not with half measures. That woman has been managed and minimized and run out of places by people who weren't worth a quarter of her. If she's willing to trust this, trust it fully. Don't make her do the work of convincing herself she deserves it." Ethan held Agnes Greer's gaze. "I know what she deserves," he said quietly. "I've known it since May told me about her." "Good," Agnes said. "That's good." The conversation was interrupted by Nathan Caldwell walking through May's front door. Clara was still in the back room. She heard his voice before she heard his words, that particular quality of entitlement that she had learned to recognize the way you learn to recognize a sour note, and she went still for just a moment. Then she came through to the front. Caldwell stopped when he saw her. He had not expected to see her. That was immediately clear from the way his expression moved through surprise and toward recalibration. "Miss Whitfield," he said. "Mr. Caldwell," she said. The bakery was quiet. May had moved to stand behind her counter with her arms folded and the expression of a woman who had banned him once and was entirely prepared to do it again. Ethan was standing near the window, and he had gone very still, in the way Clara had seen him go still in the yard, the night Caldwell had ridden out the stillness of a man who has decided exactly how far he's going to let something go, and is waiting to see if it gets there. "I heard you were still in the county," Caldwell said. "I live in the county," Clara said. "I'm not going anywhere." "The Walkers run a cattle operation," Caldwell said. His voice had the performance of someone who is making an argument he knows is weak and is compensating with volume. "People will wonder what exactly." "People can wonder whatever they like," Clara said. "That's what people do. It doesn't change the facts." "And what are the facts?" Caldwell said. "The facts," Clara said, "are that I came to Red Willow 14 months ago and worked honestly and did no harm to anyone. The facts are that you told lies about me because I wouldn't give you what you wanted. The facts are that every person in this room knows exactly what happened and why." She looked at him steadily. "And the fact that matters most right now is that I'm staying. Not because you approve of it. Not despite your disapproval of it. Simply because it is where I am and where I intend to be." A long silence. May Holbrook looked at Nathan Caldwell with the expression of a woman who has made a decision. "Nathan," she said, "you need to leave my bakery." "May." "My bakery," she repeated. "Out." He went. Not quickly, he was too proud for quick, but he went. And the door closed behind him with the clean finality of a thing that has been put in its proper place. The bakery let out a collective breath. Samuel at his table said without looking up from his cinnamon roll, "I don't like him." "You've never met him," Lily said. "I can tell," Samuel said with complete serenity. May laughed, a real one, full and sudden. The laugh of a woman who has had a long year and needed exactly this specific moment. And Clara felt something release in her chest that she hadn't realized had been held tight, a catch in some interior mechanism that had been braced and was now finally fully allowed to let go. Ethan came and stood beside her. He didn't take her hand. They were in the middle of May's bakery with the children present, and Agnes Greer watching everything with the attention of a woman compiling notes, but he stood close enough that his shoulder was against hers, and that was its own statement, clear and simple and entirely intended. May looked at the two of them standing like that, and she nodded once, the short decisive nod of a woman whose plan has succeeded. "Stay for supper," May said. "Both of you, the children too." "We've got a woman at the ranch who needs," Ethan began. "Vera Holt," May said. Ethan stared at her. "How do you know about Vera Holt?" "I know everything," May said with complete satisfaction. "Tom Bridger's been buying coffee here since October. He talks." She waved her hand. "Tom will see to her. You stay. We're celebrating." "Celebrating what?" Lily asked. May looked at her with the fond attention she had always paid to this particular sharp-minded child. "The fact that the right people ended up in the right place," she said. "That doesn't happen as often as it should. When it does, you celebrate it." Lily considered this. Then she looked at Clara with those dark eyes that saw everything. "I told you," she said. "I told you to stay." "You did," Clara said. "And I was right." "You were right." Lily looked satisfied in the complete, uncomplicated way of a person whose good judgment has been confirmed. She picked up her cinnamon roll. "I'm usually right," she said. "Lily," Ethan said. "She is, though," Samuel said helpfully. The rest of the afternoon wound itself out in the warmth of May Holbrook's back room, with the smell of baking and coffee, and the particular warmth of people gathered together, who are glad to be gathered together. Agnes Greer stayed for the first part of supper, and contributed opinions about everything with her usual efficiency. Tom Bridger appeared at dusk with a message from the ranch that all was well, and Vera Holt had made cornbread, which Clara noted with approval. May fed everyone with the determination of a woman who considered adequate feeding to be a form of love, which in Clara's experience it was. When they finally drove home in the wagon, Samuel was asleep against Clara's arm before they cleared the edge of town. Lily was awake, but quiet, the thoughtful quiet, not the watchful quiet, which Clara had learned to distinguish. She was leaning against her father's arm and looking at the stars. "Papa," Lily said. You should ask her properly." Ethan did not say anything for a moment. "Ask her what?" "You know what?" Lily said, and she went back to looking at the stars with the patience of a child who has made her position clear and is prepared to wait. Clara looked straight ahead at the road. She felt Ethan's eyes on the side of her face. She did not turn to meet them. She pressed her lips together against the smile that was coming regardless of what she did about it. "Lily," Ethan said. "I'm looking at the stars," Lily said. "I'm not part of this conversation." And somehow, impossibly, the smile made it all the way out. 3 weeks after the storm broke on a Saturday morning, when the ranch had the still quality of a day that had not yet decided what it wanted to be, Ethan came to find Clara in the kitchen. He was dressed better than a ranch morning called for. She noticed that immediately: the good shirt, the jacket, the hair that had been attended to. She set down the bread she was shaping and turned to face him fully. He was holding something. It was a ring, small and plain, a thin band with a single small stone. The kind of ring that had been chosen by a man who understood that some things needed to be real rather than impressive. He held it the way you hold something you've been carrying for a while, waiting for the right moment. "Clara Whitfield," he said. She looked at the ring and then at his face, which was doing the same thing. It had done the... She said she was staying that depth of feeling that had moved past the point of performance into something realer and more personal than most people let anyone see. "I know I'm not," he started. "Don't tell me what you're not," she said quietly. "Tell me what you are." He looked at her. He took a breath. "I'm a man who drove 4 miles in the dark because I was afraid if I didn't, the best thing that hadn't happened to me yet was going to happen to someone else," he said. "I'm a man who has been carrying this house alone for 3 years and who didn't know how much that was costing him until he had someone to sit across from at the kitchen table." He paused. "I'm a man who wants to spend the rest of his life finding out what you think about things. Because you think about things in a way I've never encountered in another person, and I don't want to stop having access to that." He held the ring out. "And I'm asking you not because I need you, though I do, but because I want you. The way you said you needed to hear. I want you. This life. Your presence in it." Clara's hands were not shaking. She noticed this with the same private satisfaction she had noticed it on the porch the night Caldwell came with his hired men. "Yes," she said. "Ethan Walker. Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been waiting there. From somewhere in the back of the house, there was an immediate burst of feet on the floorboards, and Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway at a speed that made very clear she had been waiting at a particular listening distance for the preceding several minutes. "She said yes," Lily said. "She said yes," Ethan confirmed. Lily turned back toward the hallway. "Samuel." She said yes. Samuel appeared behind his sister. He looked at Clara. He looked at the ring. He looked at his father. He nodded once, the small, serious nod of a person whose expectations have been met. "Good," he said. "That's good. Clara Whitfield." And she understood, standing in that kitchen, that the name was about to change in the way that mattered. Not the formal way, but the way of belonging. Looked at these 4 people who had become in 16 days the architecture of everything she had not known how to hope for, and felt the precise, overwhelming particular weight of a life that had turned toward something it had been traveling toward for years without knowing it. She was not tolerating this house. She was not managing it, enduring it, surviving it. She was in it. She had chosen it. And it had chosen her back in the particular way that real things do not, with fanfare, not with drama, but with a ring that fit, and a child who had been listening at the door, and a man whose hands were warm and certain, and already hers. Part 5. The wedding was on a Thursday. Nobody had planned. Thursday, specifically, it had arrived, the way right moments tend to arrive, not because they were scheduled, but because all the conditions had finally aligned, and waiting any longer would have been a choice made out of habit rather than sense. May Holbrook had said when Ethan told her the date, "Thursday is as good a day as any for the best thing that's happened in this county in 3 years." And that had settled it. Clara dressed in the room that had become hers, the room with the window that closed properly. Now the window that had started the whole accounting of what kind of man Ethan Walker was. Agnes Greer had come the evening before with a dress that had belonged to her daughter, altered and pressed in a blue that was not new, but was right. The kind of right that came from something worn by someone who had loved it first and passed it forward. Clara had looked at it for a long moment, and then looked at Agnes and said, "It's beautiful." And Agnes had said, "It suits you." And that had been the entirety of the ceremony about the dress, because neither of them was a woman who needed more words than the necessary ones. Vera Holt had done Clara's hair, which Vera had turned out to have a gift for, that nobody had known about, including Vera herself, until the occasion demanded it. She pinned it with the 3 ivory pins that had been Clara's mother's, which Clara had carried in the bottom of the sewing tin through every town and every fresh start, and which had never had occasion to be used like this before. Lily stood in the doorway, watching the whole process, with the intensity of someone who was memorizing it. "You look different," Lily said. "So people keep telling me," Clara said. "I mean different from when you came," Lily said. "Not just today different, since you've been here." She came into the room and stood beside Vera, and looked at Clara's reflection with those dark eyes that noticed everything. "You stopped looking like you were waiting for something bad to happen." Clara met her eyes in the reflection. "When did that stop?" Lily thought about it seriously. "The night with Caldwell," she said. "When you went to the door yourself. After that you were different." She paused. "You stopped bracing." May had used that exact word in the bakery. Clara looked at this girl who had grown up in 2 months from a child, bracing for her own losses, into something steadier, more open, not unguarded. Lily would never be unguarded. It wasn't her nature, but willing. "Lily Walker," Clara said. "That'll be your name too soon," Lily said. "Lily Walker and Clara Walker." "I know." Lily looked at her in the mirror for another moment. Then she said very quietly in the voice she used only for things that cost her something to say, "Mama would have liked you." Clara felt the whole weight of that sentence, everything it contained, everything it cost an 8-year-old girl to say out loud. She turned from the mirror and looked at Lily directly. "That," she said, "is the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me." Lily's jaw tightened the way it did when she was holding something in. "Don't make it a big thing," she said. "I won't," Clara said. And she didn't. She turned back to the mirror and let Vera finish the last pin, and Lily stood at her shoulder, and that was enough. That was everything. Samuel knocked on the doorframe at exactly the wrong moment, which was his gift. "Papa says, is everyone ready, because Tom Bridger keeps adjusting his collar, and he looks like he's going to do something about it himself." "Tell your father we're ready," Clara said. Samuel looked at her. His expression did the complicated thing. It sometimes did the thing where he was feeling something large and was deciding how much of it to let be visible. He settled on a nod, solemn and complete, the nod of a 5-year-old boy who understood more than 5-year-olds were supposed to understand, and had decided this particular moment deserved his most serious acknowledgement. "You look good, Clara," he said. "Thank you, Samuel." "Okay," he said, and went to deliver the message, and Clara pressed her hand flat against her sternum for just a moment and breathed. The ceremony was held in the main room of the ranch house, because the weather was cold, and because Ethan had said, when the question of where came up, that he wanted it to happen where they actually lived, not in a church they attended occasionally, or a courthouse 2 counties over, but in the room where the children did their lessons, and where Clara had sat across from him at that kitchen table, and told him the truth, and changed everything. May Holbrook had come and brought cinnamon rolls, because she considered any gathering incomplete without them. Agnes Greer had come and brought her husband Arthur, who turned out to be a quiet man with an unexpectedly good singing voice that nobody deployed during the ceremony, but that would become apparent later. Reverend Aldous, who rode circuit through that part of Wyoming and had a tolerance for non-standard ceremony that came from years of marrying people in barns and wagon beds, and one memorable occasion on a riverbank. In 3 feet of water, stood at the front of the room and looked at the 2 people in front of him with the equanimity of a man who had seen enough of life to know when something was real. It was real. Ethan stood with the particular stillness that was his fullest form of presence, not rigid, not guarded, but utterly there, the way he was when something mattered enough to have every part of his attention. He looked at Clara when she came to stand beside him, and his expression did not perform anything. It simply was open clear the face of a man who has come through something difficult and found himself on the other side of it, standing next to the exact right person. Clara stood beside him and felt for the first time in her memory that she was in precisely the place she was supposed to be. Not making do. Not making the best of things. Not surviving. Present chosen certain. The Reverend spoke the words. They were ordinary words, the same words said over every marriage in every church and parlor and barn in the territory. But ordinary words, said in the right moment to the right people, carry a weight that they would not carry otherwise. When he asked Ethan Walker if he took this woman, Ethan said, "I do," in the voice he used when he meant something completely the voice Clara had first heard through a closed door at 4 a.m. and had been learning the depths of ever since. When the Reverend asked Clara, she said, "I do," and she felt the words land in her chest like something coming home. Lily cried. She did it silently and with great dignity, and she was furious about it, which was the most Lily thing she had ever done, and Clara loved her for it without reserve. Samuel held Tom Bridger's hand during the whole ceremony without apparently being aware he was doing it. And Tom held his back with the careful steadiness of a man who understood that this was what was needed and was glad to provide it. May Holbrook said finally, under her breath, at the exact moment the Reverend announced them married, which produced a startled laugh from Agnes Greer, and a look from the Reverend that May met without apology. Ethan kissed Clara once brief and real, and then pulled back and looked at her and said very quietly, "Just for her. There you are." And Clara felt those two words rearrange something in her that had been waiting a long time to be rearranged. "Here I am," she said. The afternoon that followed was the kind of afternoon that doesn't announce itself as significant, but that everyone present will remember in specific detail for the rest of their lives. The smell of May's cinnamon rolls and Agnes's apple cake. The sound of Arthur Greer's surprisingly good voice leading an impromptu song that Carver joined with more enthusiasm than accuracy. The specific warm chaos of a house full of people who were genuinely glad to be together. Tom Bridger, who had been with Ethan for 7 years, through hard winters and hard losses, sat at the table after dinner with his coffee, and looked at the room and said to no one in particular, "This is how it should have always looked." And Ethan from across the room heard him and nodded once, and that was the whole of it. Vera Holt had made cornbread that nobody had asked her to make, and everyone ate it, which she received with the particular quiet satisfaction of a woman who had found unexpectedly that she was useful again. Clara had watched Vera over the past weeks with a recognition that required no words, the way a woman who has been diminished by circumstance moves through a space where she is treated as if she has worth the careful recalibration of someone learning slowly that she is allowed to take up space. Clara knew that movement from the inside. Late in the afternoon, after most of the guests had gone home, and the children were in that particular territory between awake and asleep that produced a suspended golden quiet, Clara sat on the porch with her husband. Her husband, a word she had not expected to ever say, with this specific weight of gladness, and the cold air came in clean from the north, and the stars were beginning to appear at the edge of the sky. "Ethan," she said. What did you think the morning you came to find me, the real thought? Before May's instructions, before the decision. What did you actually think when you got in the wagon?" He was quiet for a moment. She had learned his silences, which ones were avoidance, which ones were processing, which ones were the honest work of a man trying to say something accurately. This one was the last kind. "I thought," he said slowly, "that I was probably making a fool of myself. That a woman who was ready to leave at 4 a.m. was a woman who had good reasons to leave, and that showing up was either the best idea I'd had in 3 years or the most presumptuous thing I'd ever done. Which was it?" "I still don't entirely know," he said with the specific tone of a man who has arrived at a truth he finds both uncomfortable and correct. "Maybe both." "It was both," Clara said. "But the presumption was the right kind." "May said you'd open the door," Ethan said. "She said you might not, but she thought you would because you were the kind of person who gave things a chance when there was still a chance to give." "May knows me very well for someone who's known me 14 months. May knew you in about 4 days, Ethan said. The rest was just confirmation. Clara felt him reach for her hand in the dark, and she gave it. They sat in the particular warmth of two cold hands, finding each other for a long moment. I almost didn't open the door, Clara said. I know. I had my hand on the handle, and I had already decided I wasn't going to. I was going to let you knock until you stopped and left. She looked at the stars. And then I didn't. I set the suitcase down, and I opened it, and I still don't know exactly why. I do, Ethan said. She looked at him. Because you're the kind of woman who, even when she's given up on a place, hasn't given up on people, he said. You were done with Red Willow, but you hadn't decided yet that every knocked door was the same as every other. He paused. You gave it one more. You didn't know why, but you gave it one more. Clara held that for a moment. That's very wise for a man who spent 4 years telling himself he didn't need anything. 3 years, he said. You told me 4 once back in the beginning. I was rounding up, he said. Clara turned and looked at him with the fullness of attention she had come to understand was the greatest thing she could offer another person. Not performance, not accommodation, but genuine unreserved seeing. Ethan Walker, she said. Clara Walker, he said back, and the name came from him like something he had been holding carefully and was now allowed to set down in the open in the air where it could be real. She laughed. It was a real laugh, sudden and warm, the laugh of a woman who has arrived somewhere she didn't know she was going and found it was exactly where she needed to be. I spent 14 months in that town, she said, and then 16 days in this house, and now I'm going to spend the rest of my life here. Yes, Ethan said. That's a strange math. The best things usually are, he said, inside the house. Samuel called out something in his half-asleep voice, not distressed, just the sound of a child checking that the world was still where he'd left it. Clara was up from her chair before the thought had fully formed, because that was what you did when a child called out, and she was halfway to the door when she heard Lily's voice from her own room, quiet and sure. She's right here, Samuel. Go to sleep. And there was a pause, and then the sound of both rooms going quiet again. Clara stopped in the doorway. She looked back at Ethan, who was watching her with the expression she could now read completely, the one that held everything. He was all of it available to her in a way it had never been available to anyone since Ruth, and maybe differently than it had been even then, because he was different now, and she was different. And what they had built was built by two people who had already learned what loss cost, and had chosen this with that knowledge intact. Come back, he said. She came back. She sat beside him again, and he put his arm around her, and she fit against his side, the way things fit when they are correctly placed, not forced, not adjusted, just right. They sat until the cold made staying outside more commitment than pleasure, and then they went inside to their house, to their children, to the life that had been built out of a knock on a door at 4 a.m, and a woman who had put down her suitcase one last time. The years that followed were not simple. Clara Walker would tell you that herself, and she was a woman who did not dress things up. There were winters that tested the ranch beyond what seemed survivable, and springs that came late, and summers that ran dry. There was a year when the cattle market collapsed, and Ethan and Tom and Carver worked themselves to the edge of what human endurance permitted to keep the operation intact. There was a season when Samuel got a fever that lasted 3 weeks, and Clara did not leave his side for the worst of it. And when he finally turned the corner, she went out to the barn alone and sat in the hay and cried for the first time since she had arrived at this ranch. The stored-up tears of a woman who had held herself together through so much that when the crisis passed, the relief of it needed somewhere to go. Ethan found her in the barn. He didn't say anything. He sat down beside her in the hay and put his arm around her and let her cry until it was done. And when it was done, he said, "He's going to be fine." And she said, "I know, that's why I'm crying." And he understood that because he was a man who had learned over years of marriage to this woman to understand the things that sounded backward but weren't. Lily grew up with the efficiency of a person who had always seemed older than her years and was simply closing the gap. At 12, she was running the household accounts. At 14, she was training the new ranch hands on fence repair with a thoroughness that made Tom Bridger say privately to Ethan, that she was going to be a terror in the absolute best sense of the word by the time she was 20. At 16, she had a young man from the next county looking at her with intentions that Lily assessed with the dispassion of a strategist and the secret delight of a girl, and she discussed it with Clara the way she discussed everything important. Straight, no dressing up. What do you actually think? I think, Clara said, that you should decide based on who he is when things are hard, not when things are easy. Anyone can be charming in good weather. Lily had looked at her with that dark-eyed steadiness. That's what you did with Papa, isn't it? Watched what he was like when things were hard. The window, Clara said. What window? He fixed my window, Clara said. The second morning. I hadn't asked him to. He just fixed it because it needed fixing and he was there. She paused. That was when I started paying attention to who he actually was. Lily filed this. She always filed everything. The window, she repeated. Small things, real things, Clara said. They tell you more than the big declarations. Lily nodded. Okay, she said. And she applied this framework with the precision that was entirely her own, and she made a good decision, and it held. Samuel grew into a young man who was quiet in the way that had depth rather than absence in it, who read everything he could get his hands on, and had opinions about all of it, who had his father's steadiness and Clara's directness in a combination that was entirely his own. At 18, he told Clara that he didn't remember the time before she came, not in the sense that it hadn't happened, but in the sense that his real memories, the ones that felt like home, started from a kitchen table and a card game called War, and a woman who had listened to him explain the rules while she kneaded bread. Clara had not cried about that either. She had simply held it, that gift of being remembered, as the beginning of something, rather than the interruption of it. May Holbrook lived to be 84, and she was difficult and accurate and irreplaceable until the end. When she died, she left the bakery to the young woman who had been working there for 6 years, and she left Clara a letter that was 4 sentences long. You were the best thing I ever sent anyone. Don't thank me. I know what you are. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The last line was the same as the first letter, and Clara kept this one in the same coat pocket, folded the same way, and when she pressed her hand against it, she could still feel the shape of it, and that was enough. Nathan Caldwell left Red Willow 2 years after Clara's wedding, under circumstances that involved his father's business decisions, catching up with certain consequences that the Caldwell name could not entirely forestall. No one in particular was surprised. Agnes Greer said, "Good riddance," at May's bakery counter, and went back to her coffee, which was the most anyone needed to say about it. Tom Bridger helped Vera Holt get her homestead back in order that spring, as Ethan had promised. Vera ran it herself for 6 more years before her daughter came from Missouri to be with her, and she rode over to the Walker Ranch every Thursday for all 6 of those years, for what started as mending help and became, without announcement, the kind of friendship that women build when they have survived similar things and recognized in each other the specific shape of what survival looks like. One evening, many years into the life she had built, Clara was sitting on the same porch where she had sat on her wedding day, and Ethan came and sat beside her with 2 cups of coffee and the comfortable ease of a man who had been sitting beside the same woman for long enough that the sitting itself had become one of the great pleasures of his existence. The ranch spread out before them in the way it always had: the barn, the fencing, the cattle in the far field, the land that they had worked together through every kind of season. It was not a grand place. It was not a wealthy place. It was a real place, earned and tended and loved, and it had the particular beauty of things that are loved, which is the most durable beauty there is. "Ethan," Clara said. Do you remember what you said to me the first morning in the kitchen?" he thought. "I said a lot of things that morning. You said you didn't want me to stay out of obligation. You said you wanted me to want to stay." "I remember." She turned and looked at him. This man she had known in a doorway at 4 in the morning and had been knowing ever since, deeper and truer with every hard season and every ordinary morning. This man who fixed windows and stood in yards and held his children and sat in kitchens with cold coffee at midnight and had chosen every single day to be exactly what he was. "I want you to know," she said, "that I want to be here. Still. More than the first day. More than the first year." She held his gaze. That has never changed. Ethan looked at her. He was older now. They were both older, with more weather in his face and more silver in his hair, and the particular quality of a man who has been shaped by his life into something truer and more essential than what he started as. He looked at her with the same attention he had paid her on the very first morning in the kitchen over coffee she had made because she wanted to. "I know," he said. "I've always known." "Good," she said. "I just wanted to say it." He reached for her hand. She gave it. They sat on the porch of the ranch that had been half a heart and was now a whole one in the Wyoming evening, in the life they had built from a knocked door and a set-down suitcase, and a woman who had given one more chance to a man who deserved it. The woman who had packed her bags in silence and nearly disappeared into the dark of an early Wyoming morning had instead walked through a door and found the only home she had ever stopped wanting to leave. She had not been rescued. She had not been saved by someone else's strength. She had opened the door herself, set down the suitcase, herself, driven out in the wagon. Herself stood on her own porch and faced down her own accusers and said yes from her own certainty and her own choice. She had been seen fully, truly, without condition, and she had let herself be seen, and that was the bravest thing she had ever done. Clara Walker sat on her porch with her husband's hand in hers, and the stars coming out over Wyoming and the sounds of her house behind her, and she was not tolerating this life, or surviving it, or making the best of it. She was living it. She had chosen it, and it had chosen her back. That is not a small thing. That is everything.